Hello and welcome to Why Postliberalism Failed. This is episode 9. Today is August 22nd, 2024. Today we'll be talking to Daniel Di Martino. We'll be speaking especially about problems of post-liberal approaches to labor. And he is going to give us the lowdown on the problems there. We'll actually talk about a few other things as well, because Daniel's interests are wide and varied and deep. Before we talk about that, though, I'll let the audience know a little bit more about Daniel. And he is originally from Venezuela, so pray for his country and for his people. He left in 2016 to attend Indiana University, where he was given a full ride, and then eventually moved on with a degree in quantitative economics to Columbia University, where he received a PhD in economics as well. He is a Novak Journalism Fellow, award winner for the Fund of American Studies, 1856 Society Award by the Young Republican National Federation, and a rising leader from the Heritage Foundation Institute for Humane Studies fellow. He is also a graduate fellow at the Manhattan Institute. If you couldn't tell, he's very much a creature of the sort of millennial side hustle generation, where there's more side hustles than regular hustles. Very familiar with this problem, but it's great to have you on, Dr. Di Martino.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm not doctor yet, still going into the last year, but hopefully soon.
I have confidence that you'll be Dr. Di Martino. I'm sorry to have promoted you early, but there are worse things in life.
I also, it sounds weird. I don't know if I ever want to be like a doctor or anything.
Yeah, the people who make insisting on titles part of their personality usually are like Dr. Jill Biden, right? It's sort of
like, that's what it reminds me of, and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to be like that.
Yeah, my advisor at UVA, Jim Caesar, is just Jim. Like, how much more confident do you need to be about your own academic
yeah, I do like when students, when I'm teaching a class, do say professor or something like that, but that's because I want to keep that distance with the students. You don't want to, especially since I'm young, right? Like I'm 25 now. Like you don't want them to underestimate you or to think that they can make the decisions, right, for the class.
Tom, do you recognize the subtle flex there? He's 25. He's almost done with his PhD at Columbia. Did you hear that?
Yeah, that's just really impressive.
We get it, Dan. You're smart. All right.
It literally just means I went from undergrad to doctorate, which is the totally traditional path. Most people do.
I wandered a non-traditional path that's called lazy and bad. So don't follow my example. Follow Dan's. Anyway, let's get started. Thomas, do you want to open up with the question here? This is more your side of the book, so I'm a little uncomfortable with this.
Well, yeah, Daniel. So you're an expert in immigration law, and the post-liberals are kind of divided on immigration law a little bit. But do you want to say anything about? You have any thoughts on? First of all, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your research? Like, what is not immigration law? I'm sorry, the economics of immigration, right? So that's your research, right? So, a lot of people don't think about the economics of immigration. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end, this is about the economics of what happens when people move, right? And so I focus on two questions. Number one is who moves? So this is a very important factor. I would argue it's the key success or the key factor for America's success is who chose to move to America. The people who chose to move to America are different from the people who chose to stay behind in their countries of origin. From the founders and the people who came before them to the people who came right after the founding. Think about it. Especially in a world where travel was very expensive in the 18th and 19th century, the people who came to the US were actually not the poor people. This is a big myth that a lot of people promote, like, oh, my great-grandfather came through Ellis Island and he only had $10 in his pocket. So if you go to Ellis Island, and I've been many times, you can check actually how much cash every passenger brought with them to the US. And some people had $200, some people had $500, many people had $50. if you adjust that for inflation to today, we're talking about everybody brought thousands of dollars in cash. And if you then see how many people in the planet or in Europe had that amount of cash, you would think that these people are at least in the top 10% of Europeans who came to America. So America didn't get the downtrodden people of the world. And then think about it even today. To immigrate legally to the United States, probably at least $10,000 you need to spend on everything. What share of the world population has $10,000 net worth? Or more, because your net worth needs to be more than that so that you can spend that. So we're talking about a very small fraction of the world is even able to afford to come here, even illegally. Who has the money for a flight? Who has the money for and the physical capacity to do all that trek through the southern border? Only Mexicans have it easy. The rest of the world does not. And Canadians, I guess, if they want to cross the northern border, they have it even easier because there's not even a wall or anything. So that fascinates me. What also fascinates me is how people assimilate. And so my research is both who moves, how different policies inside the US induce different people to move and how they affect the people who are here to assimilate. One of the things I'm researching is the temporary protected status program, which is effectively a legalization program that's temporary. And so I look at what happens to illegal immigrants who receive work permits. And I find that people who are more highly educated or here illegally actually benefit tremendously from legalization, from amnesty. But people who are not highly educated, high school dropouts, barely benefit at all from amnesty. And the logic is that if you get legalized, you can access better professions, but those better professions will only hire you if you have some sort of education, right? Like if you legalize the farm workers, which is a very popular policy on the left, let's legalize the farm workers because they give us the food, they're still gonna be farm workers. That like nothing's gonna change. Yeah, for sure, their psychological, health and all of that, they're not gonna be deported, that's good for them, but they're not gonna make more money. And so I think that this is an interesting insight that, most people haven't talked about yet.
So, before we contrast, because are you an open borders supporter?
No.
Okay, you're not an open borders supporter. Okay,
No.
because that's the first criticism that people are gonna have. Before we could talk about the contrast with your position in the post-liberals, what would you, since you also do policy work as well, right? Okay, so what would be like your ideal immigration policy?
Yeah, well, let me explain why a lot of people just say they're against open borders and they just say, oh, it's a bad thing. Let me explain specifically why it's a really bad thing. And I wouldn't even call it open borders. I think you have to steelman the argument, right? I want, this is what would be the most libertarian argument. They want free legal migration. Like if you're not a criminal, if you're not sick, if you don't pose a threat, right? You should be allowed to come here, and that's just the principle of non-aggression. The issue, though, is that everybody who comes to the US legally will end up getting entitlement benefits, Social Security and Medicare, which means that imagine you suddenly said anybody who's not a criminal or a danger to America or sick can immigrate to the US today. How many people would show up? And who would be those people? It would be very poor people, sure. Maybe if they're young people, if they're children, that wouldn't be a problem, actually. But a lot of 50-year-olds would show up. A lot of 60-year-olds would show up. A lot of people who are high school dropouts would show up. And my research, this is a paper that will be published in like 3 weeks with the Manhattan Institute. I would say it's the thing I've worked the longest on. And I find that all those people, the people who are high school dropouts, even the people who just have a high school diploma, everybody who's over the age of 55 is a net fiscal drag on the federal budget, which means they would cost us billions and billions of dollars. So surely they can work and they can live, but the fact that they're eligible for these benefits is a big problem. And the response to that argument that I have against free migration by, maybe people like Alex Norrister, right, who I really respect, and other people who think about immigration, is that, well, they should just not be eligible for entitlement benefits. Well, then you don't think they should become American. right? Because if you think somebody should become an American, they need to have the same rights as other Americans. You can't have Americans who are eligible for Social Security and Americans who are not eligible for Social Security. And so, well, then we need to cut the entitlements. I mean, sure, I agree we should reduce it, but in any case, you will have a redistributive system. I mean, I do believe that the poor deserve some help. I do believe in disability insurance. I do believe in unemployment insurance. I believe in some certain level of income that should be given so that people don't starve. So if you're going to have that, necessarily, the relatively poorer immigrants are going to be a net drag. And you want to have as many people as you can in this country who are really smart, who are going to contribute, but not people who are going to become leeches of the government. A lot of people around the world today would be better off begging in the streets of America than staying in their home countries. And that's just a reality. That's the reality, for example, for a lot of Venezuelans where I come from. But would America be better off by having millions of people begging on the streets, even if those people are better off? I think it wouldn't be.
So what, so then you're not for open borders then. So what would be then, how, or are you for like liberal borders then, would you say?
Well, I just would say I am for highly skilled immigration. I think the current system is flawed on many ways. Number one, regardless of the immigration system you want an immigration system that is simple and that is efficient, right? People forget the immigration system is a government system. Therefore, I call it's the DMV of immigration, where it really is terrible service for the immigrants, for the employers, for the Americans. Like, I think it's unacceptable that an American who marries an immigrant has to wait 2 years in a bureaucratic delay process. How many people are separated from their relatives, right? I think that that's a disgrace. I also think it's a disgrace that if you're a Nobel Prize winner born in India, you cannot immigrate to the United States today under the current system. You have to wait at least a decade. And if you are like the top engineer at TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor, the company there, you also cannot immigrate to the US unless you wait many years. Like, we are making it easy for people who will be net drags on the economy. Think about all the family migrants who are not immediate relatives who come to America at older ages, who don't have higher education. It's hundreds of thousands. The parents of US citizens are allowed to immigrate in unlimited numbers. It's 150,000 a year now. And all those people are over the age of 55. All those people will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to society over their life. Yet the people who will actually add perhaps over $1 million in net fiscal contributions are prohibited from coming. And so I am for a system that prioritizes people based on their ability, based on their English proficiency, based on their age, and it's more efficient for everyone, right? That makes decisions promptly.
Now, we were just talking to Catherine Pakalik a couple of weeks ago, and she does some stuff on family policy and more, at least she has a more classical liberal approach to family policy, more about cutting out the problems rather than, paying people to have kids. What about as a way of correcting the demographic issue, if you also favored young families with immigration policy?
Well, this is another reason to favor young people, right? If you admit 150,000 a year parents of US citizens who are all over the age of 55, probably most of them are in their 60s, none of them are going to have kids. So these are immigrants who come and they die in 30 years, and that's not going to solve any of the demographic problem. And that's the case for a lot of the immigration system. So you ideally want to have a system that favors young people. Other than that, think about the problem with the delays, especially in the marriage of US citizens to immigrants. If you delay their unification, you delay their fertility too. Do you think people are going to have children when they don't even know if they can stay together? Like, talk about an uncertainty in your family that prohibits you from having a kid, because what happens if I have to leave the US and we can have a kid in that situation? So they delay family formation. And so having a prompt immigration system, especially for the spouses of US citizens, is key. Also, for international adoptees, It's become so difficult to do all of this internationally that international adoptions are falling to all-time lows when they were at their all-time highs, I think, in the early 2000s. And so these are all things that the immigration system can change and improve.
I just have one last question before I pass it over to James. And that has to do with that everything you said makes sense to me. But is there any room then, do you say, what do you think if somebody says, well, we have all this low skilled labor that wants to get in, that's coming in illegally through the border. And when we reform this so that we have better border security, there's still this bottleneck there. Would you favor like more streamlining work visas for low skilled labor? Okay.
So specifically what I would favor is, the US currently has 2 visa programs for non-college immigrants who want to work here. And that is the H-2A and the H-2B visas. H-2A is for agriculture, that's seasonal. I think that one should be expanded to non-seasonal agriculture. For example, the milk industry is not eligible for the H-2A visa because of this, and other industries aren't either because they're not seasonal, they're year-round. And so I think that allowing those people to come here temporarily and then go back to their home countries, maybe every year, and so that would help. And that wouldn't make them eligible for Social Security or citizenship or anything like that. They will go back. That's what they want to do at the end. They just want to come here for maybe a year, send money back home, go back, stay for a year, then come back in a year more. And then the H-2B is the same as the H-2A, but for non-agriculture. And that one is severely limited. It's only about 65,000 of those visas every year. The president has authority to increase them somewhat too, but they don't very much. That includes industries like construction, land mowing, all of these things, landscaping, sorry. And we can massively increase the H-2A visa. And that would be very good because it would be only people who are sponsored by the employers. A big issue we have today is that we have all these people coming through the border. And I think a lot of libertarians make the mistake of saying, well, they're just going to fill in jobs. These people don't necessarily come here to fill in jobs because they show up, but they're not sponsored by an employer. They will end up working probably as super drivers, but that's not where the labor shortage is. So if you want to target immigration to places where there are actually labor shortages, where there are actually places where both geographic areas and industries that can expand if there is more labor rather than lower wages or anything like that, then you need to have an employer-sponsored system and then also secure the border.
All right, go ahead, James.
Yeah, so I decided to look up something that I'd looked at before this. I had kind of forgotten what it said. It's an article in the American Postliberal by a man named Paul Arias. And it's his effort to account for what a post-liberal immigration policy would look like. A little different from the one that we talked about before we started here, which is Adrian Vermeule's Empire of Guadalupe, where it's just all these Catholics come here and they, that's Adrian's is a little odd. This is
I like
actually...
that. I can't say I'm against that.
Okay. So the one that's a little bit more specific and I think addresses some of the things you actually just mentioned is from this article. By the way, it's called What is Post-Liberal Immigration Policy? And he says, after talking a little bit about Catholic social teaching, he says, taken together with the principles provided by the Catechism, we can assert that a post-liberal policy for immigration must distinguish itself from the right and left liberal approaches by, number one, acknowledging the primacy of the common good of the host country, to ensure the integrity of the society that political authority has responsibility for ensuring the common good, and number three, recognize and foster the virtuous establishment of family formation among the guests. This approach axiomatically rejects the proposals of right and left liberals that foster mass immigration, which endangers the common life of American citizens, attempts at reform by increasing legal immigration with a bad justification, such as the need for more low-skilled workers due to labor shortage, high-skilled workers for industrial innovation, or more perversely, as a means to reduce inflation, aims at creating an underclass that is used, not loved. This primarily concerns considering the consequences for native-born American workers who often find themselves without jobs and being unable to provide for their own families due to these policies. So there was some of this and what you were saying before, but not all of this. And so I tease out what would be a response to this effort at establishing a post-liberal idea of immigration.
Well, number one, I think the issue there is the conclusion from those principles, right? Like, of course, the duty of the United States is to the people here, right? Though you can get into very dark places if you just say that, right? Like it's not, would destroying a foreign nation who's not attacking the U.S. maybe be in the interest of the U.S. Maybe, but would that be a right thing to do? No, right? And that's something that I would expect, especially Catholics, to understand, right? Like the right to life comes before any national interest. And so, unless it's as a means of self-defense, of course. So my concern is when they use, especially when they use the language of mass migration. What is mass migration? They're not talking about illegal immigration. They're saying that we currently have too many immigrants coming to the U.S. But are there too many immigrants coming to the U.S.? I've actually looked at this question and looked at it historically, right? The U.S. has had a very long history of receiving immigrants. And in the early 19th century and early 20th century and late 19th, so late 1800s until the 1920s, the U.S. had triple the amount of immigration per capita than it does today. Legal immigration, I'm talking about. And you can say, well, but now we have a lot of illegal immigration. Well, we do at the present year, but not until 2020. In fact, right before the pandemic and even during the Obama administration, we had the lowest level of illegal immigration since the 60s. This is another thing I would say we need to give credit to Obama for. The level of illegal immigration really went down was during the Obama administration. I would argue this didn't have much to do with Obama or Trump. It had much more to do with trends in the U.S. economy. But the point is, he's arguing there in the post-liberals. I think this is one of the pseudonyms. Like they don't want to say who their name is, right? Is that right, James?
I don't know. I looked him up. He has a Twitter account, but I can't find him anywhere else.
Okay.
So it could be that it's like a partially a noted person, but it is an issue with dealing with contemporary post-liberals is that they often hide behind pseudonyms.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like that. I understand sometimes people want to use pseudonyms to like protect, being canceled or whatever, but it's difficult to engage with someone if you don't know where they come from or whatever. But the point is, you cannot assume that too many immigrants is bad for the common good. Why? Like that's not making the argument. I do think that more high-skilled immigration would be good for any host receiving nation. Like I think that any nation who's pursuing their self-interest as a country, as a society, would say, we want to steal all the smart people from the rest of the world, because that's how you win. That's how America has won so far. Imagine if America didn't have Einstein, didn't have Elon Musk. The richest person in America is an immigrant who came here on an H-1B visa. Isn't that incredible? Like all the people who on the right are trashing, the H-1B is replacing all our jobs and taking all the coder jobs from the American college students. Oh, I feel so sad about that. It's freaking Elon Musk who came on an H-1B visa. Surely not everybody's Elon Musk, but if you eliminate that pathway, we wouldn't have had him. So you need to come up with a policy that ensures that we can keep attracting people like him, because it's not just him, it's many other people who are not multi-billionaires, but who are multi-millionaires who you want to have. And, and the thing about, you don't want to have a mass of people working for you who are an underclass. I totally agree. I don't support that policy. Massive illegal immigration is a bad thing, but it's also why I do think that the current policies that keep a lot of people illegal that should be legalized are wrong. And I would hope that the post-liberals agree that the over 1 million Americans who are married to an illegal immigrant should not be deported, those spouses, right?
So there's a weird conclusion to this article. As you're talking, I'm getting increasingly agitated, not by what you're saying, but I'm sort of I'm listening to what you have to say, and then I'm looking over at what he says, and it's kind of get angry at him for not saying what you're saying, if that makes sense. So
Tell me.
he says this, the sole craft of high school and university historiography and moral formation of the 1990s aimed at popularizing moral relativism in matters of nation building by disintegrated academic formation, as well as formalizing liberal sexual ethics. This is how you end up turning immigrants into sort of leftists, or what he says, Latinx people, and at this whereas people on the right seem to be sort of indifferent to the conditions immigrants live in once they get here. And so there's a way in which people are drawn into the United States as immigrants, and they become innocent victims of right and left liberalism, left liberals turning them into little radicals that vote for Democrats, and but stay poor because of right-wing, right liberal policies. And so he actually says at the end here, my one appeal to naturalized American citizens is to reconsider whether the permissive policies that brought you here in the first place come from a genuine love of who you are and where you come from, or if you can see that the liberal regime desires your servility. You will find that the same people.
That's dark.
That's very dark.
That's dark because I don't think any naturalized person would agree either.
No.
Like, yeah, of course. I mean, they're here because they want to be here, not because the liberal regime imported them, right? This is another whole thing that I hate when people say, well, we're importing all these people. No, you're not importing anyone. These are not goods, right? Especially people who, you know, we believe in the dignity of a human person. We don't want to be talking about people as if they were purchases, right? They are not. They come here out of their own will, unless they're trafficked, in which case we can talk about that. Also, not all the illegal immigrants are trafficked. Very few are. This is a whole other myth. They actually pay to come here. Like we might say they're in bad conditions and everything, but they're not being unwillingly trafficked to the US overwhelmingly. And the people who are deserve all the protection of the United States. But on the argument about the left trying to indoctrinate, right, on let's say the liberal regime, right? The problem is that they call us right liberals too. So I don't think I think I am trying to educate people. In fact, I dedicate to that. I have an organization called the Dissident Project, which to fight exactly what this author was talking about, we send immigrants who lived in totalitarian regimes abroad to speak at high schools to tell their stories. So we have people from Venezuela, from Cuba, from Iran, from Russia, from China, from Eritrea, Zimbabwe, who go to high school to tell their stories so that Americans here can appreciate how good we have it in so many ways, right? Religious freedom, free speech, free enterprise. These are the things we want to promote. That doesn't mean we're perfect, but that socialism is not the answer, you know, totalitarianism is not the answer. The Constitution matters. And I do think that the left wants to change that in high schools and colleges, but thankfully, the overwhelming majority of immigrants coming to America come after high school and after college. The great majority. Therefore, the left doesn't really have a chance at indoctrinating them in high school and college. Maybe you can say, well, through the culture, but I would tend to argue that people by the age, you know, maybe they're 25 like me, we already have our thoughts very formed, especially political thoughts, and it's hard to indoctrinate someone at this age.
It's a funny thing about post-liberals is that they're actually very anti-American. And so in a way, what they're doing here is they're trying to export their anti-American positions to would-be migrants as a way of kind of giving cover to the fact that what they actually want is just less immigration. But when they say this, it's not because they think immigrants are like, you know, terrible people. Arias does seem to think that they took our jobs. There's like, that's a very strong element here. Okay. But the thing is that like, it wasn't worth it for them. That's so it's, in other words, he's doing them a favor by letting them know that all that's going to happen when they come here is they're going to take these jobs from Americans, and their kids going to end up blue-haired, genderqueer Instagram influencers, and that's not what they want for their kids. It's a very odd way of doing this, but
like I understand the whole culture concern, and we have to fix that. I agree, but I don't think that, you know, you can argue immigrants are really all stealing all these jobs. Like the U.S. in 1776, you know what the population was? 2.5 million.
Yeah,
nothing. Do you think all those people, like, if you think that immigrants steal all the jobs long term, I'm not talking short term, I'm talking about long term econ. If immigrants steal the jobs, that means your children will steal the jobs of other children, and like growing the population is bad. Therefore, if you want to keep a strong economy, you want an ever decreasing population and people not to have kids.
Yeah, what's the unemployment rate
That
right
is
now?
wrong.
Daniel, what's the unemployment rate right now?
Well, the unemployment rate is like 4.3%, but
Yeah,
especially if you look at the unemployment among people with college degrees, most of the time, even during recessions, is below 4%. Right now, it's about 1% for people with college degrees.
Yeah,
So we're basically at full employment. Bringing in immigrants who are highly skilled is not going to take people's jobs. The effect that the thing that we argue in econ is mostly about wages, not employment. So the thing about jobs being destroyed is not something most people would subscribe to.
And the wages issue is always targeted to one area of the economy, right? It's because if you spread it out through the whole economy, if it were spread out evenly throughout the whole economy, they'd be just as much contributing to the overall
I would
wealth
argue
of the economy.
The consensus is that if the immigrants were, imagine you have a country of 1,000 people and you bring in 10 immigrants who are on average look like the other 1,000 people. Like they work in the same industries, distributed over the same places, then that's not going to affect wages. That's just going to grow everything proportionally. But immigrants are not like the people who are here and don't work in the same sectors. Therefore, they will change the relative supply and demand for sectors, and some sectors will have higher wages and others lower relative wages.
That's right. So it can affect workers in some sectors if they're disproportionately.
Yes. For example, if you bring in 1 million agricultural workers who can't do any other job except agriculture, I'm simplifying this a lot, then obviously you're going to lower agricultural sector wages, and you're going to increase the wages of the rest, by the way. So there's a trade-off here. The issue specifically with the agricultural industry is that if more than 90% of all workers in agriculture are immigrants, by the way, in the US. Half of them are in the H-2A visa I talked about, and the other half are illegal. What happens if you suddenly said, we're not going to have more H-2A visas and we're going to do mass deportations? Agricultural wages will go up, but they will go up so much that it would be unprofitable to have any farm in the United States, and all the farms would go broke in this country, and we would import all our food. Maybe you want to do that. That would not employ more Americans. That would not increase wages. That would be terrible for the farm owners who are American. And so you see what I'm getting at? Like nobody would benefit from that.
Yeah. So what's your estimate? What's the best? How many illegal immigrants do we have in the United States?
Yeah, that's a great thing. A great question, because there's been so much debate about it, and I see so many crazy numbers being.
Oh, it's like the MAGA people compete over who can say a higher number.
Yeah, they compete.
Like 100 million.
Next thing they're gonna say there's 300 million. We're all illegals, and that's it. So the total number of immigrants in the U.S. is about 55 million. Okay, that is about 15% of the U.S. population. The number of illegal immigrants, I would argue, so pre-Biden, it was about 10.5 million. It stayed pretty stable during the Trump administration, same as during Obama. And the reason it stayed stable is that people die, right? Many of the old illegals die or they go back home when they are older. This has been happening a lot with the Mexican illegal immigrants who have been here for 2-3 decades. And fewer people are coming in. And so as a consequence, the illegal population stabilized. But then during the Biden administration, we had a huge border crisis, right? A lot of people are saying, 10 million people have come during Biden. This is not true. There have been over 10 million encounters at the border. But an encounter is not a person coming in. It's just a time when a border patrol agent encountered an individual, which can be the same individual that deported 2 days ago. So what happens is that about half of those people were deported under Title 42 or other things. So really we're talking about maybe top 5 more million people came under the Biden administration. Now, that is a lot of people. That is half, it's a 50% increase of the legal population. I would argue that's probably the number, and we're at around 15 million illegal immigrants. If you look at the data and the research from even the most restrictionist groups like the Center of Immigration Studies, they agree with my estimate. It's about 15 million.
15 million.
So that they are, at least they are not being, exaggerating and say we have 30 or 40 million people illegally. So it's about 15 million. That is a big number. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, 15
I mean,
million.
think about it. That is over 4% of the US population, 15 million.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about, well, we should just do mass deportations, that is 1 in 22 people.
Yeah.
Want to deport 1 in 22 people in this country? That's a lot of people. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, given like when we talk about like what
source, we need to get at the source of the problem.
Mhm.
And this is where I think the post-liberals and generally the people on the right who just want to have this knee-jerk reaction of just deport everyone, they don't get the nuance of why we are here.
Yeah.
And the reason we are here is that under the US immigration law, under the Refugee Act of 1980, everybody who is physically present in America has a right to claim asylum. Now you say, well, they shouldn't have the right. Well, congratulations for your opinion, but they do have the right under the current law. And you're not going to change that because you don't have 60 votes in the Senate. Democrats are never going to agree to eliminate the right to asylum. So what are you going to do about it? Well, we can fix the problem by saying we're not going to take 10 years to adjudicate an asylum claim under which you can have kids, get married, and then why would you deport somebody who has kids and got married in America and has been living here for a decade? Now it becomes inhumane, right?
Yeah.
I agree. So you should, at least under my ideal system, fund detention centers at the border where everybody who crosses illegally is detained. Their asylum claims cannot be adjudicated in maybe a couple weeks, less than a month. So you need to hire a lot more immigration judges. There's only 700 today for millions of claims. And then you can choose, oh, the claim was approved, welcome to America. The claim was denied, like it will happen in most cases, and then on a flight back home. But those flights cost money. And this is where like all these people think, well, we can just deport, and Trump is going to fix this when he comes back on an office on January 20th. With what money is he going to deport anybody? That's decided by Congress, not by Trump.
Well, what if Mexico pays for it?
Or send them to Mexico, right? Like that's a good idea for Mexicans, but you cannot send to Mexico non-Mexicans without the Mexican government's consent. Do you think Mexico is going to consent to over 1 million people being sent to their country? I highly doubt it.
So, all right, as an economist then, if you said, what is it? Illegal immigrants represent a little bit like 1/20th of the people in the United States?
Yeah, approximately.
Yeah. So, what's a good year for economic growth in the United States? Like 2%, 3%?
Yeah, over 3%.
Yeah, 3% on top of real growth, on top of inflation or whatever, right?
Right. We're talking about inflation. The thing is that that's not, I mean, what matters is also per capita, right? Not necessarily the growth economy. So if we're talking about per capita, it's really 2% is a good
2%, right?
Yeah.
So if you deported all of the illegal immigrants, just kick them all out, what's that going to do to the economy that year?
Well, it would be disastrous for the sectors that are heavy on immigrant labor, right? Let's talk about just the illegals, right? So it would be disastrous for agriculture. I would argue that most American farms, or at least a third, would close. If you were actually able to deport all of them, okay? I don't think that's doable, but imagine you were. And the more you get closer to that, the more this happens. So farms destroyed, construction, it would be a big problem for construction. We would still have construction going on because we must. We can't import construction, unlike food. And so those sectors would just increase in price. And by increasing the price of construction, then you really reduce economic growth generally by a lot. Think about other sectors that are heavy on immigrant labor. Food delivery, like delivery drivers and workers, restaurant workers. So those services would increase in price. I'm not as concerned about the agriculture on the goods for the impact on us, right? I mean, it would be disastrous for farmers, but for the average person in the US, it wouldn't, because we can import the food, and so it might go up a little bit.
They would have to change the tariff policies, though, right?
Well, right. If
Yeah.
you also say we're going to tariff all the imports at the same time you deport all the
Yeah.
immigrants, and then now there you're really destroying.
So
the
groceries are going to get really expensive, right? And
if
there are
you do have the
shortages.
tariffs, but if you
Yeah.
don't, then the impact will not be very large, really.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's all done at once in a very short period of time. But if it's done over time, then the world economy will adapt. We'll just import a lot more from Mexico. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, you will deport the immigrants, and as a consequence, the food is going to get made in Mexico and Canada and China.
Mhm. So the combination of deporting people with high tariffs is a bad combination.
It would be disastrous.
Yeah.
Now that would be the downfall of the U.S. economy. This is a big thing that the post-liberals don't understand. You can't have both ways.
Mm-hmm.
If you do both ways, then what you want is autarky. And like, I never understood this argument against trade, like, oh, well, trade is bad for us, but then immigration is bad for us too. Like, then you don't want to live in the world, right? You want the United States to be an island. You think the rest of the world is bad for you for some reason. And well, then why put tariffs? Why don't just go all the way and ban all trade? Why should it be 10%? Why not 1,000% the tariff? I don't get the limiting principle.
Okay, so as now you're also for an economist, you're also a very politically savvy person. So you understand how politics actually works. What of those claims of like the Trump-Vance administration are actually, when it comes to immigration and economic policy, which ones of them are credible that are actually going to be enacted, and which ones are just them, sort of giving red meat to their base?
Well, the mass deportation is red meat. That's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen.
I'm not concerned. The things that are going to happen, and this will actually increase the illegal immigrant population, is, for example, I'm pretty sure they're going to try to take away all the temporary protected status designations that have been done, like Trump tried during his first term, but he failed because the court stopped him. But most of those cases were decided favorably to him later. And so he will have the executive authority to make, for example, I think there are about 300 to 500,000 Salvadorans in the US who, since 2001, have been under the TPS, Temporary Protected Status program. And so they have been legally here under that program. And if Trump takes it away, he's suddenly going to create hundreds of thousands of new illegal immigrants who were before not even eligible for deportation. They have not committed any crime because as a condition of staying in that program, they cannot commit any felony. They have work permission, so that's labor that's going to stop having work permission, and it's going to go to low-skilled sectors, right? Imagine you're a nurse, right, working on TPS. Now, the hospital is not going to keep you if you lose your TPS. So you're going to have to become a restaurant worker. So this is actually going to be worse for the low-skilled Americans. Because I'm very good for the American, I guess, highly skilled people. So it's going to actually increase inequality. And so he's going to try to take away TPS. I'm very concerned about the legal immigration policy. So, for example, the travel bans and all of that. And I'll give you an example. I have a friend, her name is Tamina. You probably know of her from social media, Tamina de Bossorgi. She speaks for us in Dissident Project. She came from Iran in 2016. If she and her family had come to America a year later, they would have been banned by the Trump travel ban from Iran. I think there's a lot of smart Iranians, most of whom hate the Iranian regime. Why would you want to ban them from coming? I think that's so self-defeating.
Yeah, it's like Cuban immigrants, right?
From Iran? Isn't Sohrab Ahmari from Iran?
Yeah, he is.
So he would have been banned to come to America under the Trump policy. I don't know if you know that. Because every Iranian was banned. So I mean, obviously don't support that. The other things that I'm concerned about is, I mean, I would say that's mainly, but just a lot of the things they did with legal immigration, I think were negative. There was this policy that was done during the first Trump term, which I call the blank space policy. It meant that every form that you submitted, if you left a blank space, you would be automatically denied. And that was one of these things done just to mess with people so that they would lose time, they would lose money, the government was more inefficient because their end goal was not to fix the immigration system, was not to stop illegal immigration, was to stop all immigration. And so they just made it more difficult and inefficient.
As somebody who hates forms and red tape more than that, just makes me so angry that they would do
man,
that.
you have no idea the red tape that there are with immigration that could be simplified is incredible.
Oh man.
And that's where, like, I would hope that this appeals to Republicans, that you want to stop the bad people from coming. You want to stop even the low-skilled people from coming. But these kinds of policies don't achieve that. These kinds of policies only hurt the people who come here to do good, to contribute, to, you know, be married with somebody, work in a top company, who want to create a company. Currently, the processing time for an immigration application from an investor who is investing at least $1 million in this country and creating 10 jobs is 56 months. How many years is 56 months? I mean, 48 months is 4 years. So 56 months.
Yeah, almost 5 years.
Nearly 5 years. Is that reasonable? Is that the kind of thing you want, where it's easier to bring in a low-skilled person than a multi-millionaire investor? Give me a break.
So, James, do you have any thoughts on this, or how to connect it back with post-liberals besides Vance?
I don't know. I'm not sure how much this is based on what y'all were just talking about. This idea of the common good in the as a sort of prioritized among existing citizens becomes a kind of calling card for them, and it's a useful one because it does have like an automatic appeal to a certain kind of voter, right? This is the people that suspect that their incomes would be greater if there was less competition. But the thing that I wonder is that there doesn't seem to be much of an appreciation for secondary effects of immigration on markets and the price of goods. Why do you think there's this emphasis on wages rather than prices? And is it economic illiteracy?
Well, in part, I think most people just look at the first stage impacts of something. I mean, the Democrats do that. Kamala Harris thinks that to make people afford homes, we should just give them $25K. And that's not going to make homes more expensive. That's just going to...
I believe it's going to make them around $25,000 more expensive, Dan.
Exactly. It's funny, but it's exactly what's going to happen.
I wonder if those dollars are going to be worth as much as they were before the stipend.
I wonder if we had any recent experience where the government gave checks to people and prices went up, right?
We just need to subsidize demand.
Right?
Just
like that never
demand.
has happened where the government gave checks to people and inflation increased. That never happened.
Never.
I remember this, actually. It was actually people on the right who said I was against the working class when I opposed the Trump stimulus checks. Because I opposed the Trump stimulus checks and I also opposed the Biden stimulus checks. Yeah. And look what happened. You know, we had inflation nearly 10%. So let me begin with this. Yes, it's true that if you have a short-term reduction in the number of workers in just a specific industry, you get a short-term increase in the wages of those workers. But that is only true when it's in one specific industry, not when it's in all of them. Because if you get a decrease in all of the workers in all the industries, you just get reduced production overall, which reduces demand for the other industries, right? Imagine you have a lot fewer construction workers, but there's also fewer engineers, there's fewer companies that demand construction, therefore the wages don't change. You just have fewer people in the country and that's it. But if you do have only one sector, then it's true at the short term. In the long term, then it's just more expensive. The industry ends up investing less and wages go back to their equilibrium level. That's what would happen in the long term. Prices-wise, I'm not very sympathetic to the idea that immigration lowers inflation. In fact, I have a piece coming up with a colleague from the Manhattan Institute, Dan Katz. I think it's a myth. It's not true that it lowers it, that it increases it. Especially when you think about globally traded goods like agriculture, those are world level prices. Like oil prices are not set in the US, they're set worldwide. We are not significant enough to change that. I mean, maybe they would change a little bit, but it's not the main effect. What we care about is
Yeah, the only way the
welfare.
United States affects prices for petroleum is the refusal to exploit it.
Right,
But it has
exactly,
nothing to
yeah.
do with the labor force.
That's right. That's right. It's not about the workers.
That was for my dad, by the way, who worked for 40 years in the petroleum industry and is beside himself at the fact that we do so little to do it. Like when New York banned fracking, he was like, "Oh, I guess they just want to be poor."
Yeah. Wow. You know, my parents had a gas station in Venezuela. That's what
Oh, yeah.
So we are somewhat related to the petroleum industry.
You're at the very end of the process. My dad was the one who
Exactly.
knocked on the ground and listened to see if there was gas, or rather there was petroleum. So my dad joked that
so he was
the one.
exploring.
Yeah, he did exploration. So my dad jokes that he's the one who turned Norway into an emirate. Because
so he was in Norway doing that.
yeah, they lived in Norway in the 1970s, and he found the first offshore, which he said is you know, he's the reason why they have the most palatial healthcare system, and he also says he's the reason why Scotland hasn't gone belly up. But you know,
wow, that is so cool, James.
the trouble with being on the exploration side is that once the company has fields to develop, they don't need him anymore. So he should have been in the petroleum engineering section. Then he would have had steady work. But instead, it was boom and bust.
Think about this. Think about this with the petroleum example.
Yeah.
People are not just workers, and this is something that's important to understand. People
There's
are
a great book by that,
consumers.
right?
Sorry, what?
Isn't there a great book?
Yeah, by my colleague George Borges.
Yes.
We wanted workers, we got people.
It's a great title.
And it's actually something against open borders, which is totally true. I mean, if we were just bringing in machines that worked, you would want open borders for machines. And indeed, we have open borders for machines. We have no capital controls. That's what it is. It's capital. So we do have open borders for machines. But people are not just workers, they're also consumers. They get welfare, they commit crimes, they do all these other things. And that's why you do want some restrictions on people. But there's another side of the coin. They're not just workers, they're also consumers, which means they also increase the demand for other industries. So if you just brought a ton of engineers to America, just engineers, it's true that the wage of an engineer would go down, but they would demand a lot more haircuts, they would demand a lot more houses, and the wages and prices for other things would go up, benefiting the rest of the country. So when you think about also people who can innovate and actually create per capita growth, that's what you want. People who have ideas, people who are entrepreneurs. We're one of the few developed countries, the United States, that does not have an entrepreneur visa. That is a problem. Why wouldn't you want to have an entrepreneurs coming to America who maybe have 100K who can invest or raise seed capital from venture capital, right? You can talk to people in Silicon Valley, talk to J.D. Vance's friends, because J.D. Vance's friends are struggling tremendously with allowing the really smart immigrants to remain in Silicon Valley. And if we lose that, you know what's going to happen? It's Canada who's going to take them. Google opened an office in Vancouver across the border from Seattle, specifically to hire the people who lose the H-1B visa lottery for high-skilled immigrants. And that's where they send them. They send them to Canada. They open there. They pay taxes there. They work there. The only difference is that they're not paying their taxes here, and that Canada is getting our free lunch.
And then
so
also,
do you think that you have maybe two, this would be, I was looking back at the RS article. Do you think the other, so I talked about wages versus prices. And the other one is that because post-liberals have such an emphatically statist vision, right? One in which the state actually has a considerably aggressive welfare state, then when they look at immigrants, they tend to look at them as consumers, as you said, but not of market services, but of government services. And so the priority is that if you look at the broader post-liberal policy program, it also includes things like family subsidies, and these can, like those in Hungary. And so if you're allowing for the rather large number of immigrants to come in, not only are their wages going to stay low, as they argue, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but also the costs on government will go up because of the anticipated benefits here. So do you think, isn't this implicitly a case against having those kinds of benefits in place in the first place?
Yes, but you could say, well, maybe they do want that world with those benefits. And in that world, it's true that most immigrants would be net negatives. I'll grant them that. But then you want a lot of the immigrants who are not going to be net negative so that you can actually finance your agenda, right?
Right, especially
and
with family sizes being low and the family policies, as we said, had in the last podcast with Catherine, not working.
That's right. Well, what's interesting is in my upcoming report with the Manhattan Institute, I find that the most positive age and education group for new immigrants coming to America would be those who come to America between the ages of 18 and 24, who end up obtaining a graduate degree. Those people are about over $1 million relative to a native, contributing more in taxes than receiving in government benefits. The average native is a net negative. These immigrants are over 1 million positive over the lifetime. That is, and today, that's the group with the most restrictive immigration policy. There have been bills in Congress that would exempt people with graduate degrees from immigration caps. That would increase immigration maybe by 10 to 20,000 people a year. We're talking about a week's worth of border crossings at today's levels. Imagine you're getting just 10,000. 10,000 times 1 million is $10 billion in lifetime new government revenue net per year that this is in place. So we're talking about, over the long run, increasing government revenues by 10 billion a year just because of 10,000 people. You can finance entire government programs because of this.
One final thing that came to mind is that a lot of the post-liberal policy imagination comes from experiences from countries that are sort of part of your background. So you mentioned autarky. Of course, one of the great experiments in autarky was post-war Spain under Francisco Franco. And a lot of the economic models that post-liberals used were also based on early Catholic social teaching by Leo XIII that eventually becomes known as corporatism.
And Pius the Ninth, especially for corporate.
Yeah,
Pius
Pius the 11th. Is it Quadragesimo Anno?
Yeah, the 40th. Yeah.
And so, what is it about these approaches? I know with autarky, there is a desire to kind of preserve stability over all things, right? There's a disorder to market life that upsets a kind of person, especially a person who wants to return to tradition, right? They like the idea of the sort of Tolkien, sort of Rivendell sort of like way of life, and cities aren't like that. But what is it about also the problems with early Catholic social teaching and this desire for corporatism?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned this was based on Catholic social teaching, but it was actually also the Opus Dei who actually fixed Spain's economy during the Franco era in the 50s. So let's give us a break. Give us a break.
No, Opus Dei was great. They were like, we got this Franco guy. He understands that we're all broke. The rest of Europe is doing great. We're just gonna kind of get the autarky out of here.
Yeah, and look, I have a lot of experience with it because my grandparents on my mom's side left Spain in the 50s because of the autarky. So my grandpa had to have a rationing book, and they had to buy things illegally in order to feed their family. My grandma was better off because she was a farmer, so at least they could make food. But my grandpa was one of those few city people that there were in Spain a few city people still in the 30s born. So and look, I totally understand the appeal because they saw how Spain was protected from, say, the sexual revolution through the Franco regime, right? But then look at what happened to Spain after Franco fell. Spain is extremely irreligious. It's extremely depraved in many ways, the country. My family lives in Spain now, in Madrid. I'm actually going there very soon. And it's a beautiful place. It's part of Europe, beautiful weather, all of that. But Spain is still very poor to this day because of a lot of those policies. The autarky just made Spain one of the poorest countries in Europe because you couldn't trade at all. and it created the shortages. They put price controls. It's true that they weren't communist, right? Oh, they're better off than the communists. Sure, they're better off than the communists, but I would rather have free enterprise than either of those two things.
I always hated that argument because it's such a low bar. You know, it's
I mean,
like
everybody's better off than the communists, I guess.
it's like, wow, great.
At least they didn't burn the churches during Franco.
Yeah.
It's true. They were burning the churches, like the previous regime and the Republic.
Especially in Navarre, where they wanted they wanted someone else, and he paid them back with bullets. So much for being a friend of the church.
But it was a very tough time, and that's why my grandpa had to leave, because he was the oldest brother of 7. His father had died in the Spanish Civil War. Fighting for Franco, actually. He was on the nationalist side, but he died. My grandpa never met him. He was 1 year old when he died. My grandpa was born in the year the Civil War began, 1936. And so by 1956, when he hadn't turned 20 yet, he left to Venezuela with my grandma. I think they got married in Venezuela, but they already knew each other from Galicia. That's where they're from. By the way, I'm doing the Way of St. James in October.
Oh my gosh.
With my mom.
Which path?
What?
Which path?
I'm from Orense.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At
my age, I might have to do the English path, but I always want to do the French one.
Oh, no. This is neither. No. No, the French path, like, you mean like starting in France or in the
Yeah,
way?
that one where you have to cross the mountains. That one's a beast.
Okay. No, that's tough, man. You need like a month for that.
Yeah.
I'm just doing the minimum
20 years
100
off
kilometers required.
Yeah. I'll do the English one from the north of Galicia, just kind of stroll.
I think that's good. I think that's fair. But, so we have to be nuanced. Like, I understand these people have these ideas, but they didn't live them. They don't understand the poverty they caused. And they don't understand that that's not really what Catholic social teaching is about. Like, the Catholic Church doesn't want us to restrict trade and be poor in the name of some fictitious common good. The common good is to do well, and do well with our talents and with our product. I mean, that's at the end the teaching of Opus Dei, right? That anybody can be a saint through their work. And being prosperous is actually a good thing, because you are going to do good things with that prosperity that you created. That doesn't mean that you can't end up doing bad things. We can always do bad things, but the goal is to be good.
So Daniel, Gladden Papin wrote an article a few years ago, or I don't know how many years ago it was now, but about corporatism.
It's in
right?
2020.
2020, he wrote this article in favor of corporatism. Now, Franco's Spain had corporatism before Opus Dei fixed it, right? And it was based off Mussolini's model of corporatism, right? And the idea is that the government would sort of give these legal privileges to various cartels and different industries, and it would limit competition, but then they could take care of their work, take care of their workers and regulate their industry and their whatever. And they would be as a corporate body, they would be represented by the government and have a special place in relation to the government. You don't recommend going back to that, do you?
No, I think would be disastrous. I mean, think about it. Isn't this exactly what all these people complain about big tech? They just want a government-endorsed big tech for every sector. I think, first, you are very naive if you think they're going to be conservative. And if you think, well, no, because we're going to choose who leads the companies, then what you want is really a tyrannical government that chooses who owns what. But, it's going to be better than socialism, because the government is not going to run them. It's going to be these friendly businessmen that we appoint, and they're going to be maximizing profit. Therefore, it's better than a government-run company. Yeah, it's better than a government-run company, but it's going to be really bad if you just have monopolies all over the place, government-endorsed. It's going to be very tyrannical, because you can't challenge the regime, right? Like, you wouldn't be able to start a new company and challenge them if you don't have the right ideas. What kind of country is that? Not only would it be a poor country, but it would be just a tyrannical country. It wouldn't be America. I think one of my favorite phrases by Benjamin Franklin is, there where liberty dwells, there is my nation. If this country stops being free, it stops being the country it is. It becomes something else. And I don't want that something else.
All right, James. I guess, and then I guess we have any last questions, maybe about Vermeule's Empire of Guadalupe, or what do you?
No, you know, I think when we were getting
I
started,
am in favor. I am in favor of setting up a small nation to test the idea of the Empire of Guadalupe.
there,
Oh.
yeah. So there's two things about that are funny. One is that before we were getting started, Daniel pointed out, and this is true, is that a lot of especially Latin Americans coming to the United States arrive as cultural Catholics and rapidly get snapped up by various evangelical Protestant churches. I live in South Florida, and we used to go to a homeschool called CC, or we called it that for so long that I've actually forgotten what it stands for, but it's a Protestant based homeschooling co-op, and everyone that ran that used to be Catholic, and they were all belonged to this non-denominational evangelical church, which if you scrub the paint off the wall is just Baptist. But but the other thing is that this is a real division when it comes to where your priorities are if you're a post-liberal, because someone was there's this Fide, this Catholic group, Fide International, was celebrating this enormous like Eucharistic parade, or as a Marian procession. I forget which one it was in France. I forget where it was in France, but many of the processioners appeared to be African, or they appeared to be from other parts of the world. And they didn't appear to be like pale French people. And so Catholics were really excited about this from other parts of the world, but a lot of French Catholics were like, this is terrible, right? Because none of the people marching here are white. So how, like, you know, what is the sort of dark story to a lot of these sorts of things? Why is it that we start to see among these questions this kind of emphasis on native populations versus migrant populations?
So I think there is a good reason to be sad about that. That is not a racist reason.
Yeah.
And the reason is, it is a sad thing that the people from this nation are not believing in God anymore. France, for example. It is a sad thing that the only people who believe in God are the people who come from another country, because that is not sustainable, right? That there's a reason that is happening, and you should be concerned that the children of those people who do believe in God and in the profession will also end up like the others, right? And that is especially the case in France, which is enforcing secularity and secularism, and it's terrible. I think, I mean, France is not in a good place, and it's not going in a good direction. Same as most of Europe, and same as maybe the United States long term. And so I think there's a good argument to say, well, yeah, we want to have, if your goal is to have, say, a Catholic country, well, we want to have as many Catholics come in as possible. Okay, that's a good argument for a lot of immigration that way. And then you forget about the economic consequences.
The perfidious papists are finally subverting the good Protestant
Exactly.
republic.
This is, I mean, it's funny because some
Thomas
of
Nast's
the
worst nightmare.
post-liberals are literally the people that know-nothings warned you about. Who are the people who support the Emperor Guadalupe? Vermeule. Vermeule are the people, the person that the know-nothings warned you about. That's so
and he's
funny.
a traitor, because he's like, I think he's like a Dutch Protestant background. I think he's like New Amsterdam. That's how far back his family goes. And here he is converting to the foreign potentate.
Look, I welcome him. I say it all in good spirits. I say it all in fun. I think that the fall of religiosity is a problem, and it's not just a problem in America and Europe. It's a problem worldwide. I think it's eventually happening in Africa and in Latin America. It's already happening. The Catholic faith is falling much more rapidly in Latin America, because it's not just because of atheism. It's actually many countries are becoming very highly evangelical. The Northern Triangle, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, are right now, there are more Protestants than Catholics in those three countries. And that is actually thanks to the American missionaries, by the way. So props to all the Protestants from America who go to Central America and evangelize, because it worked.
Well, we should we'll have a separate episode on this, because Peter Berger, who'd studied the secularization, he said that his conclusion was it was mostly an education issue, that the countries with centralized education were the ones that tended to secularize. In the U.S., for the longest time, our school districts were so many that you didn't have that issue. But now it was an issue at a smaller level, which is why, like James would tell you, the bishops in the 19th century were pushing for something like school choice, so that
I think
the
it's an
church could
economic
educate.
issue, Thomas.
Mhm.
I think that as people get wealthier, as societies get wealthier.
Well, they say it's an economic
it's-
issue,
yeah.
but you've seen how the U.S. is an outlier, right?
But
On
it's
the
falling
economic
too.
side, huh?
And it's an outlier, I think, because of the immigrants who come to the U.S.
Well,
over time.
that's one portion of it, but the centralized education apparently has been a big issue with that, especially in Western Europe. Secularization was strongest in Western Europe, where they had these centralized education systems. And I'm wondering if the adoption of universal school choice in many states is going to.
I think that would help. I think it would help because you would perhaps prevent the children of the religious people from becoming irreligious by sending them to religious schools, right? I think that would help prevent some of that. I still think the long-term trend would still be to fall. Like what I'm hoping for is that at least it stabilizes. And then perhaps increase a little bit.
Well, I was actually at a talk at a thing with Peter Singer, and they were talking about long-termism. And it was nice because the person they had on talking about long-termism actually was very pro-natalist. He thought we needed to have more kids. But he said that the long-term trends demographically are going to be a drop in the general population until these like very religious groups, their populations keep growing exponentially. So they think that the world will get more religious when this happens.
Perhaps, yeah, I've read that argument. I'm not sure that's true. I think the fertility of those groups is also falling, just later and at a slower pace. I hope he's right. I'm not sure. I think
maybe combine that with universal school choice and
I think the whole thing about the native population losing religiosity is a problem. Like you can't depend on just immigration to maintain religion. I think that's what's sad about it, James, from your original question. And I'm not sure how to stop that. I think immigration could be part of the solution, but it can't solve it. The native population is too big to, to say we're going to keep the population demographically okay with immigration, and then we're also going to increase religiosity. I think we can do it at the margin. We can say focus refugees on people who are fleeing religious persecution, Christians. We can focus immigration into young people who are going to have kids, right, and are going to live longer. So you increase population in the long run slightly. But the world is demographically falling. The world is losing religiosity. There will be a limit to which we can do this.
I guess I'm a little bit like I see the GDP argument, but the US has always been held up as a sort of, it might just be that most of the developed countries were also producing very centralized education systems too, because they can afford them. And the fact that US has sort of been that outlier, and I don't think it's just because of immigration either, because in some of these books by gosh, where's that book? I've got the book that studied 19th century religious patterns. You guys know what I'm talking about? Stark and
Fink and Stark.
Fink and Stark. He actually talks about how like people who came here actually got more religious from where they came from, because they were like there was Catholics coming off the boats and they couldn't even tell you the doctrine of the Trinity because they just were poorly catechized. And the Catholic Church was able to sort of create this sort of educational structure, or like parish mission structure. And they actually were able to catechize them once they got here. So the religiosity was higher in the U.S. for Catholics than it was in the Catholic countries from which they were coming from. And even the people that were coming themselves became more religious as they got here.
The U.S. is special in that sense because even today, like I think about it in my own experience in college here. And we had missionaries that would take us to church when we didn't have how to get there. Like there was so much of this push to help us, be in our faith, Bible studies, all these things that in Venezuela we didn't have. And like there's this strong religious culture still in America relative to other countries that I think is really good. that I really hope to maintain, that I hope also the level of wealth of the US finances, right? I mean, this is a very philanthropic and charitable country, and a lot of those contributions go to religious groups that are trying to do things like this. And so I'm very happy about that. You know, I think that immigration is an important part of the story. It's, you know, the US was built by people who were fleeing religious persecution in a way. It's had a history of welcoming people who fled religious persecution. And as a consequence, the children of those people will also be more aware of this. I mean, there's a genetic and then there's a nurture factor here, right? I'm convinced of that. So I'm not sure if immigration will be the solution to the religious problem. I tend to think not, even if it can help. But I do know one thing about immigration, and that is, if we bring in a lot of the smart people of the world to the US, we guarantee that the US will have all the future smart people born in the world too. Because the children of really intelligent people tend to be really intelligent, okay? And so imagine you had a world where the 1 million smartest people in the planet are allowed to come to the United States. What's going to happen in 100 years? There's no way the US will be overcome by any other nation. We're going to have all the innovation, all the military power, all the economic power, and there will be no foreign dictator that can destroy this country.
Well, Daniel, there are also just different gifts that people have. And a lot of times the people that maybe aren't the most intelligent people or whatever, then they have kids who have these very unique gifts, or their culture, bring a culture that brings very unique gifts. So, I mean, the US has clearly benefited from all that diversity of gifts as well. And you see that at the Olympics, of course, where just all these different people with different came here with different subcultures, and they're just kicking the world's butt.
No, I totally agree. I think the Olympics are a great thing, but you know, like, to be fair, the gold medals aren't going to increase the military and economic strength of the US probably long term. I mean, I do, by the way, they still qualify. Every Olympic qualifies for the Highskilled visa in the US. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but I'm just talking about like the GDP and the economy.
Yeah.
They're very low paid, by the way, the Olympics in the US, most of them actually.
Yeah.
It's pretty sad what they're going through.
Yeah. But, you know, it's something for us all to be proud of. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's what's special about this country.
All right, James, you want to do we have anything more? Do you want to lead us out?
No, I just wanted to mention that I've been following the saga of this rugby player whose name I've suddenly forgotten. She's fantastic. Let me see if I can look her up. Say American women's rugby, and then it's a Lego set. Have you guys been following this?
It's a Lego set.
Sammy Sullivan, that's her name. So she was like this. It's one of the things about these Olympians. She's also a massive nerd, and was hoping to get the people from Lego to send her the Eiffel Tower Lego set. And so I've been following the saga of her getting it. She's now gotten it, and she also got married while she was in Europe. So she comes home, and like one of the boxes there isn't something that she expected. She expected to have these sort of bridal gifts, and she had this enormous box from the people of Lego. And they made a mini figure of her, which is now going to be worth like $150. So
wow.
Yeah, you know it's gonna be
that with me. I think that's cool. I was a Lego kid, so
yeah, me too. It just touched my heart. But no, I'm good. I just wanted to mention that something that's funny about American religiosity is that it also tends to distribute more towards wealthier people, which is something that people forget. So a big part of American religiosity's decline has a lot to do with changes in demographics, about who has time and who's reached out to. There was this incredible thing in the 90s called the Nehemiah Project, put on by the SBC, or Southern Baptist Convention, and they aimed at middle-class neighborhoods. They skipped poor ones because middle-class neighborhoods had resources to church plant, poor ones didn't. That was the expectation. And so aside from a few Pentecostal and charitably inclined Catholic groups, you don't find a lot of efforts to evangelize poor people in this country. So one of the causes for a secularization in the United States is the churches. And so that's why what we need is a state mandated religion in which the bishops ordain for the executive power of the United States to imprison people who do not uphold their baptismal promise.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
That's going to
Yeah.
make him really popular.
Yeah.
You
The,
know,
the joke that I always make to people is that what the most that Adrian would be able to get out of like an integralist government would be a standardized test on the catechism.
and it would be a pretty bad test, I would argue. and he would be actually criticized by the integralists.
That's right.
They would be the biggest ones. Like, no, this was terrible. This is not well done. It's like socialism wasn't done right.
That's right.
They would have done it better. They were fighting between each other. You know, you mentioned the middle class people and the wealthy people are the ones that are religious. This also shows up in the working patterns of immigrants of different educations. The biggest gap between Native women and immigrant women in their work patterns is actually among highly educated women. With that, I mean, highly educated immigrant women tend to leave the workforce in mass when they have kids. Highly educated native-born women tend just to not want to have kids. And so it's really interesting that that gap between women who are foreign versus native only exists among the highly educated. Among the ones without a high school diploma, with just high school, there's very little gap or nothing between foreign and native. Among the college educated, there's just a totally different culture among immigrant women who have college degrees. They want to have kids. They want to leave the workforce when they have kids. And the native-born women who go to college have a totally different mentality.
Yeah, this is the Mary Eberstadt hypothesis, right? That religiosity and family formation are very tightly combined. And so if you want to understand decline in American religiosity, you have to look at transformations in the American family and vice versa, because they're mutually influential. It's not one or is the intervening variable or sorry, the independent variable, and the other one's the dependent. But I could do this all day, Daniel. I think Tom, are we done? Are we good?
Yeah. Why don't you lead us out?
Wrap it up.
Yes.
I would like to apologize to our YouTube viewers for my hair. I think I forgot to put product in the hair, and so I've got this enormous mass of curls, which at my age I'm just lucky to have it all.
Isn't that the Gen Z haircut, James?
That's true. This podcast do be busting for real, for real. I'm so sorry. My attempts to use Gen Z lingo is very Ohio. We'll get out of here. Thank you very much, Dan. Congratulations on all of your accomplishments. Hopefully, we'll be calling you Dr. Dan Di Martino soon enough. Please check his workout. Plug your at on Twitter or X.
Yeah, just follow me at Daniel Di Martino. Di Martino is DIMARTINO. And you can go to my website, danieldimartino.com, Dissident Project, if you want to bring in an immigrant to speak to your high school at no cost to talk about their experience coming from a totalitarian country. That is dissidentproject.org.
You guys are going to see a lot more of Daniel out there. The man is on the grind. I see him everywhere and at everything, and he is going to be a big star. So I'm glad that we got to catch a ride for a little bit today. Daniel, thank you, everyone. This has been the Why Postliberalism Failed podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the bell icon for more, and we'll see you next time.